Irish manus 1, the boys 0. Jean and Manus planned to drive out of town along the back roads to Burnley. They wanted to get away from the squat and the business and stop out in the field somewhere and have a smoke and relax. But before they could go off, Manus had to meet some young fella outside an off licence and give him a quarter ounce. He wasn't in the habit of making deliveries, but he had a weakness or empathy for slaughterhouse workers and was making an exception for the young fella. He had another quarter ounce for himself to smoke and held the two separate quarters in his hand as they drove along the main road, heading for the off licence. It was nice, soft, oily, fresh Lebanese. As they drove down the main road, a young man ran in front of the car and put his hand out. He had blonde hair and a thin moustache. Manus realised he was drug squad. It was Jean's car and she slowed down and pulled over to the side as directed. Blonde hair and tash stood at the side of the car once it was stationary, and being confident in the average citizen's acceptance, if not respect for the law, he radioed through to his associates that he had successfully detained the suspects. Jean's car engine was actually still taking over, and as they sat there, and as blonde hair and tash radioed through, it flashed through Manus's head all that he was about to go through. The cells, the court, prison. Put your foot down, Manus stated to Jean. But he's radioing through, Jean wavered. Put your foot down, Manus ordered. Jean obeyed. She put her foot down on the accelerator and the car sped off to freedom. She turned left off the main road, pulled up beside a dirt track that led to the canal. Manus opened the car door before it stopped and ran from the vehicle up the dirt track. Jean drove off as Manus jumped over a small stone wall. He wrapped his jaw in a leaf and stashed it amongst the roots of a tree. The tree would keep his jaw safe. How would he fare? He wasn't sure what to do. He walked to an off licence and bought a few beers. Decided it was best just to walk back to the squat and see what happened. It didn't take them long to arrive. 5 of them, all in plain casual clothes, all in their 20s or early 30s. Manus shook his head and shrugged a laughing apology. Sorry about that. Try again next week. The sergeant in charge, the squat little baldy bodybuilder named Nuttall, laughed in spite of himself. The little shit in the blonde hair and tash, who they hadn't run over, was not so amused and suitably scowled in the corner. Irish manus 1, the boys 0, Nuttall acknowledged. Manus sat down on an old armchair and the beer spurting out as he opened his can seemed to answer with all the unstoppable insolence that Manus did not verbalise. The arrival of an older, more sombre, superior policeman had a sobering effect on Nuttall. It seemed like the superior gave him the nod and Nuttall tried to calm the heavy. He picked up a rolling pin from the upside-down tea chest that served as a table. Nice piece, this, Nuttall said, slapped the rolling pin against the palm of his hand. The pitiful truth was that the rolling pin was not a nice piece for hitting someone with. It had 2 thin handles which would break off. Manus realised it was all meant to intimidate him, but with Nuttall and the thin-handled rolling pin, and the scene was taking on a pantomime element. The sombre, older, most senior policeman stood silently behind Manus. He started pulling the stuffing out from the armchair just at the back of Manus's head. Nuttall said, "How's Joe?" Joe was a friend of Manus, who was in prison. Stuck for a means of communicating with Joe during his incarceration, Manus had written him little skits and stories. Manus figured the sombre old bastard who stood silently pulling the stuffing out from his armchair was there because of his stories. Manus said, "Joe's fine," Nuttall said. "Do as you want," and placed the search warrant on top of the tea chest. Manus had mentioned in one of his stories to Joe that the police felt a warrant was unnecessary for the squat. "Your stories are shite," Nuttall stated. "There's lots of people would agree with you, but I hear they were real popular on Joe's wing." Manus smirked. Popular with the illiterate, Nuttall scoffed. Manus shrugged. Empty your pockets, Manus was told. He emptied about 20 quid, some baggy skins and matches on top of the search warrant. Nuttall struck the arm of the chair Manus was sitting in with the rolling pin. Manus drank his beer and wondered what was going to happen. Nuttall hitting the arm of the chair with the rolling pin a few times was all that happened. He didn't hit it too hard, so the handle didn't break. The squat living room, come James's bedroom, was in its worst state, dirty and dark. The back door was off its hinges and stood up against the doorway. The hole in the hearth wall that served as a fireplace, come cooker, was filled with rubbish. Everywhere on the floor lay strewn empty wine bottles and cider and beer cans. James lay on his bed in the centre of the room. He was still dead drunk asleep. He'd been drinking and not eating for days. Manus had kept him company a good part of the way. The radio, stuck on a classical station, played in the background. Manus started suffering from having drunk too much and eaten too little. The light coming through the heavy bamboo blind seemed strange as the police gathered around his chair. Manus stood up and spoke. I don't hurt nobody, and I don't take drugs. Mary Jane's not a drug. Manus moved away from the chair. Nobody stopped him. He crossed the room to a chair next to James's bed. Nuttall followed him. Manus turned and went back to the chair he had been sat on. The classical music got louder as it built up to its crescendo. Turn that bloody music off, snapped Nuttall, all trace of a sense of humour having left him. One of his young associates turned the radio off. As the music stopped, so James woke up. All right, James. Manus spoke from his armchair. James stared out from bleary, bloodshot, uncomprehending eyes. James thought at first the police were friends of Manus, couldn't understand why no one was talking, and resented the onus that seemed to have fallen on him to speak. Nuttall stuck his hand in James's back pocket, and James understood. Fuck off! James's angry voice had an effeminate, slurry whine, which affected a plea rather than any threat or menace. Nuttall and his young cronies were amused by James. They grinned as they turned him over and went through his other pockets. They found 25 quid. Lot of money for the likes of you, Nuttall said. My fucking dull day, explained James. The police laughed at James. James's mouth pouted as he tried to get some wet in his lips and say, Fuck off, you're not welcome here. The police laughed. James staggered out of bed, grabbed a beer and stumbled out the back doorway. No one stopped him. More police arrived, a minibus full of young uniforms. Nuttall tried to organise the young cops and show them how to search the squat. But searching such an unorganised mess was not easy. You're wasting your time, said Manus. There's nothing here. I know. 'Cause you dumped the fucking stuff, Nuttall snapped. Manus shrugged and went out into the back entry. A young uniform was delegated to stick with him. James and Manus sat in the back entry in the shade of a wall, drinking beer. Another police vehicle arrived, a dog van. Then a friend of Manus's, Dreadlock Ian, ambled along the back entry eating a cheese and onion pie. Ian shambled up and squatted down beside Manus and James, and the police bus and the dog van. Nuttall came out, wanted to know what Ian was doing there. Ian explained that Manus was a relative of his. Manus agreed. My dreadlock brethren. Nuttall took Manus inside for a strip search. Manus complied, his little defiance, but the disinterested acceptance of the unavoidable. The police found nothing. Nothing in the squat, nothing in Manus's clothes, and nothing up Manus's asshole. When they tried to leave, their dog van wouldn't start, and Nuttall and his boys had to push. It was a hot summer day, and Manus, James, and Ian sat in the shade drinking beer, watching. They couldn't help but grin as the boys worked up a sweat. After they left, James checked the squat and found that they had left a large portable search beam behind. It was worth quite a few quid, and the police weren't getting it back. James went to the pub where he sold the torch and got drunk on the money. Manus and Ian went down to the green field by the canal, recovered the hash, and had a tug. So it was another round for Manus, but he knew they'd be back, and he wished he had some other way of earning a crust. That night, coming down from the booze, Manus had a horrible nightmare. He was in the house with Jean, whom he didn't want to leave without, but she was upstairs and he was downstairs with some big blokes. The big blokes started jerking off while staring straight ahead at nothing. They did it quite mechanically, their hands around their cocks, pulling their skin back, and then as they pulled it forward again, their hands would leave their cocks and raise towards the ceiling in a Gestapo-style salute. They kept doing it. The hands would come down from the salute and pull the skin on their dicks back, then pull it forward and raise to form a Hitler salute. Manus didn't like to admit it, but he was freaked out. He walked away from the big guys. They followed him, menacing and threatening. They didn't touch him. Manus looked at the beads of sweat trickling down their hairy bellies. They didn't speak. Manus thought he could perhaps only be hurt through his own fear, but his own fear was growing. Manus called for Jean. His voice wouldn't work right. He knew it was fear that stopped his voice, but he was finding it impossible to control his fear. The sweaty, fascist, dickhead, mechanical wankers were pleased to see Manus weaken. They could get him now he was weak. He tried again to call out for Jean. Again his voice wouldn't work. They laughed at his need for Jean. Laughed at his weakness, and he shouted loudly, "Jean!" and was awake. Jean lay beside him. He was sweating. It was a hot night, and Manus felt crap as he lay there and detoxified.